Vice President of Food Resources.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Kate. Just a quick jump over. Rod is our Vice President of Food Resources, and he is just coming up on his 10th anniversary at the food bank in just a couple of weeks. So he's been with us for a decade now. Prior to the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, he was also with Second Harvest Food Bank of North Central Ohio. And prior to that, he was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps for 12 years. So Rod has just a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience. And Rod, thank you so much, because it has certainly been an interesting past 2 years. And that's one of the things I think folks are so excited about hearing about, is just food resourcing in general, as well as just some of the challenges and successes that you've seen. I will stop and pause there. Rod, anything else that you want to add in your bio? I know it's pretty impressive. Anything that I forgot?
I think that really covers it. We've been in food banking for almost 15 years and had kind of the unique experience of working for 2 different food banks, which isn't necessarily typical of the food bank. North Central Ohio is much smaller and serves some counties west of here, Lorraine County and so forth. So it's been kind of a great opportunity to work with a big part of Northeast, North Central Ohio.
Very good. And that's one of the things I love being a part of the Feeding America Network, is all of the food banks that are part of the Feeding America Network, really being able to share our best practices with one another. Well, all right, well, let's just start off. Can you just talk a little bit about food resourcing in general and what that looks like at the food bank?
Sure. So basically, the Food Resources Department is a great team of folks that all of the food that comes into the facility, we're responsible for sourcing that from all of the available sources. And those really kind of break down into more or less 3 big buckets. One of them is pretty straightforward. It's food that's donated. That's coming from retail partners, that's coming from manufacturers through Feeding America relationships, local donors, national donors, really covers the whole gambit there. And then the second group is really food that comes to us from a government source. And the federal government, through the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, that's run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, gives us some funding each year through a process that we use to source food items. And that also encompasses the senior boxes that we do each month, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. So that's kind of under the banner of that government program. And then also within that is funds from the state of Ohio. We have a very similar program. Honestly, Ohio has one of the best, strongest relationships between its network of food banks and the state government and the state agricultural community. So there's funding there from the state that we use to source some shelf-stable and protein items, but also a tremendous amount of fresh produce that is agricultural surplus from our growers and producers. So those are kind of the big buckets of food. There's a couple people on our team that are focused specifically on partnering with retail donors. And and I forgot to mention purchased, which is all of the food we source kind of in between those 2 streams. So there may not be enough peanut butter donated for everyone that wants to have peanut butter, and there's not enough peanut butter coming in through government sources, so we go out and purchase peanut butter by the truckload, usually direct from a manufacturer or through some relationships that we've built over the years in those ways. And that kind of fills the gap between those 2 sources between donated. And then we have the kitchen team as a part of food resources as well, that's actually producing meals for seniors, child nutrition programs, and member agencies.
Very good. Thank you so much. And Rod, I think the port may be coming in and out again because it's going a little bit up and down. So I don't know if maybe you just want to hold it in. Okay. But no, we could hear you pretty clearly, but just wanted to mention that quickly just for housekeeping.
Sure.
And so talking about just all of the different kinds of buckets of how we receive the food from a variety of resources, both purchased as well as donated. Can you talk maybe a little bit about some of the other things that we receive as well? So we receive grocery items, we have the meals that come from our kitchen, and then maybe some of the household essentials that we also receive. I know those are also really important to our partners.
Absolutely. So we definitely, from a grocery standpoint, source lots of things beyond food that might be needed. We have donors that donate things like shaving cream, hand sanitizer, and things along those lines. And there are also things that we purchase in that category because we know that for clients and consumers who are utilizing their SNAP benefits, those things aren't covered by those funds, so they can get those from their pantry that they work with. There's about 75 to 100 items that we actually purchase for the food bank that are food, things like plates, cups, knives, and forks for meal programs, shampoo, deodorant, soap, adult incontinence products, feminine hygiene products. We kind of actually, during the pandemic, that's one of the categories we really expanded because of how necessary it was. We were even sourcing cleaning products during the pandemic because they were very, very difficult to get. They were difficult for us to get. They were even more so for agencies and clients. So we've really kind of expanded that category of products that we're purchasing. The kitchen meals, they are really a couple different types. There's cold lunch meal kits that goes to child nutrition programs, and then there's some hot meals that go to different partner sites. Typically, those are leaving our kitchen, kind of what you think of as going to a catering event in a foil pan. They go to the site and they heat them up and serve them, and then portion them potentially and deliver them to seniors at home. And then we have our member agencies that we support that may be doing a program on site, which you might more traditionally think of as a hot meal at church on one evening or something along those lines.
Yeah, and thinking of just the hygiene, that was a good point to bring up. It immediately made me think back to our Backpacks for Kids program, and I know that quite a few backpacks had that hand sanitizer and those household products in there specifically for the kids and their families, which I know made an incredible difference. Having just been out at a few of those sites and just hearing how grateful the parents were, because that was something that was just off the shelves and folks could not get. But as the kids were receiving their weekend meals, they also received that as well as school supplies, which was another interesting kind of fun one that was in there as well. And we briefly mentioned just the kind of soup pantry types of meals that we have, like the congregate meals.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about just our kitchen in general and the types of meals that are back in our kitchen?
Sure. So we, with our kitchen meals, we're typically providing them based on a very specific menu pattern that's required for the meal. So for the child nutrition meals, they need to get a certain amount of protein, vegetable starch, juice, fruit, milk to go with all of those meals. So we work with a nutritionist to make sure the meals meet all of those requirements. It's the exact same for the seniors. They have to meet a slightly different menu pattern, but have all of the required components. And then, so we'll have those menus, we source food to align to those menus, and then our team of cooks will prepare all of those meals. They make quite a number of sauces in-house. Joe, on our prep team, is a pro at making the sweet and sour sauce. We consistently get rave reviews about the sauces and gravies. The products, mashed potatoes and gravy is a hit pretty much every time with kids and seniors. So it is it's a key thing there. And then with a lot of the protein items, there's things like the beef stew. We cook beef stew from scratch and then mix all of that, chill it down, and then it's sent to the sites cold. So they heat it up at that point. Ground beef for sloppy joes and tacos and things along those lines, and a couple of products that they cook from scratch. And then there's box lunches. They make fresh box lunches, so seniors have an option to choose a different meal if they perhaps don't eat the meal for that day. If it's pork or if it's a fish product, they can choose a different box lunch as an alternative. So we slice all the lunch meat and make all those sandwiches in-house. Volunteers are a big part of that. They are making sandwiches and wrapping them for us is a big volunteer project. Probably one of the larger volunteer projects is outside the kitchen, making shelf-stable, but the individual lunch kits. This is kind of what it looks like here. It's actually a little cardboard tray that has this one's shelf-stable, so it has milk, chicken salad, a grain component, and a fruit cup, and a juice that actually is a vegetable component, and there's a cheese stick in here. So before the pandemic, we were packing all of these in paper bags. They weren't really very effective doing that way. We now have a piece of equipment called a flow wrapper and a conveyor belt. So we have folks working on a conveyor line, wrapping these things. They're stamped with the date and all that stuff that's important. And they're much easier to handle. They look a lot nicer. We've had a tremendous amount of positive feedback from sites just about the appearance and how it just seems like a nicer thing and set down in front of kids at a program. So those are the kind of the meal types that we're working with. Menu-wise, we do everything from hot dogs to brunch, breakfast for lunch for these programs, which is also a very, very popular meal.
Very good. I know that conveyor belt, and if you volunteered back in the kitchen before, one of the projects you may remember doing those brown paper bagged lunches, just like we all took to school or send our kids to school with. And that box that Rod had just shown was that same project, but because of an investment we were able to make thanks to community generosity, the presentation just looks so much nicer. It sounds like we've had just great feedback from partners and clients that we're serving, and we're also able to do it a lot faster and a lot more efficiently to get more meals out.
Yeah. On Friday, on Friday, they actually we had the regular group in the morning pack about 2,400 lunches and box lunches for seniors, and then the NBA Cares group in the afternoon packed another 1,620. So we actually packed over 4,000 lunches on Friday with only two groups of volunteers of about 12 people each. So that was a really huge leap forward in terms of the amount that we can ultimately, and our goal is to ultimately someday do 10,000 a day so we can support all these programs. So
that's incredible. 24 volunteers in one day packing almost over 4,000 lunches. That's impressive and definitely something to be proud of. And with the goal of getting to 10,000 meals. I know something else that kind of came out of the pandemic is a direct drop pilot program. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the innovation there and what that actually looks like?
Sure. So I'm going to try to make sure this is working properly. It's unfortunately always a little bit of technology. Yeah, so we have all of the retailers you think about across the region, the Giant Eagles, the Walmarts, the Sam's Clubs, and BJ's and Costco's and Aldi's, and all the different retailers are working with our two account managers to set up relationships with member agencies to pick up food when they can, and in some instances, our truck, where an agency can't necessarily go there, our truck will go and pick up the food at the retailer and then actually just go to the member agency site and drop it off, hopefully right ahead or very close to the time they're going to be able to distribute it, so that it's coming as quickly as it can from the grocery store to the agency site. We currently have 12 partners that are doing this. And it's something that we're working to grow. Our goal is to add another 8 to 9 of those partners this year. Just in this calendar year, that's about 20,000 pounds that is going through the direct drop program. In 2021, it was about 150,000 pounds of the total retail. To put that in context, there's about 6 million pounds of food that's donated to us from retail partners, and about 3.5 million of that is being picked up by member agencies and then going directly out to their clients from there. It's not having to go through the food bank. So that adds a huge amount of efficiency and reduces the amount of time that the food is in process. We wanted to get to folks as quickly as possible, so the quality is as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, Kate and I were volunteering a couple months ago. I believe it was at Middleburg Heights Food Pantry, and it was during the pilot. And BJ's had actually, or the truck had come directly and didn't even go to the food bank. They went to BJ's, they picked up the load and came directly to the Middleburg Heights Food Pantry. And I mean, I've been in our warehouse recently, and it's pretty packed back there. Also, all of that being fresh, perishable food, being able to get that out into the community quicker and not have that, adding a few more days of shelf life, sounds like it's been really helpful for folks. And again, just another example of just kind of the innovation that comes from you and your team, whether it's getting a bus down to the Muni lot for a warming center or this type of program. I feel like things are always just continuously changing and challenging us and us challenging ourselves.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit, I guess, speaking of just challenges in general, we all have been through challenges these past couple of years with the pandemic, but what has it been like in terms of challenges in the food resourcing world for the food bank?
Yeah, it has been, unprecedented is the word that's constantly kind of used to describe the circumstances, and it's certainly been that. It's not anything I've ever experienced in terms of a food sourcing and purchasing world. I can remember we were in a meeting here at the food bank. This was in March of 2020, just kind of days before things happened. And we were talking about supply items that would be needed for the summer feeding programs that summer. And while we're talking about hand sanitizers and cleaners and stuff, the company and person that I bought hand sanitizer from sends me an email and says, "We're out of hand sanitizer." And I'm like, oh. And then immediately things started to get worse from there. Individual meals that we purchased from our backpack program, our Chef Boyardee, they're what you see in the grocery store. Well, the manufacturer went from having 8 to 10 weeks of inventory, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of units, down to almost nothing in a matter of weeks because of the immediate need to produce grab and go type of meals. So vendors very, very quickly were running out of food. Then they started running out of cans. They started running out of labels. We just saw really unprecedented kind of changes. And so it caused us to overnight entirely change what we were trying to do to source food. To pre-pandemic, we sourced what we needed to have for agencies, and we tried to not just have tons and tons of product. But during the pandemic, we really had to go out and kind of aggressively take things because they were available at the time and they might not be available again. And so we had to be very aggressive. And then it's been just kind of a continue of kind of rolling blackouts with products where canned vegetables were very difficult, and then canned fruits, and then it's protein items because of the manufacturers having to change how many people could work in the processing plants, and trucking issues, and then things like foam plates. Foam plates are made from the same foam that they need for garage doors and insulation. And so it has impacted those. And down to things like the gloves that our kitchen staff and volunteers wear in the kitchen went from $33 a case right before the pandemic to $103 a case during the pandemic. So just huge changes in availability and cost. So it was, well, and it's still not great. But it's been very difficult to navigate.
And how did our makeup change? Because we used to receive a significant amount of food donations, essentially the food surplus from the grocery stores, and we still purchase food, but things have shifted a little bit, I think you would say. How has that changed? And maybe just if you have,
Sure.
just to give a view of like whether it's in dollars or pounds or things like that.
Sure, absolutely. So right at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of donations coming because of the way manufacturers were producing for schools and restaurants and everything. Now they had everything they needed to suddenly do something with, and then they stopped producing. So donations really started to be significantly impacted in that early time. And then we needed to do a lot of response with our emergency kits, with different meal things that we were doing. So we pivoted and started purchasing significantly more food than we've ever purchased before. So for example, in fiscal year 18, we purchased $2.8 million worth of grocery products that encompasses what would go to member agencies, what was used in backpack programs, things along those lines. And it worked out to be about 65 cents a pound or so in terms of overall just kind of flattened out cost. In fiscal year 2020, we went up to $4.6 million worth of product. And last year, and this is our fiscal year that ended end of September, $7.6 million worth of product is what we purchased. So we went from 2.5 to 7.6 in a 2-year period. So it was a very rapid increase and change. At the same time that every other food bank, every other grocery store, every disaster response organization was also trying to buy into a supply chain that was overtaxed, trying to support retail and having trouble getting materials. So it was a very difficult time. From the standpoint of cost, if you just kind of flat big picture, it's about 9% just from one over the other. But if you kind of go in and look at specific items, you see things like bag of Raisin Bran or a case of Raisin Bran went from $13 a case to $13.70 a case, taking a little bit of an increase. Something like peanut butter, which went from $12.30 a case at the start of just before the pandemic to over $15.70 a case. So we're seeing $3 or $4. And items where we had great relationships with major manufacturers for things like canned vegetables, canned green beans, where they're working with Feeding America as a partnership nationally to let us buy food from them in a way that they wouldn't necessarily let a for-profit retailer. Pre-pandemic, we were buying a case of green beans for $8.94. During the pandemic, it was up to $16.97 for a similar case because they weren't available for us to buy from. So we had to buy from other sources and find it. So it radically increased the cost of what it was taking to do that work. So, and even something like chicken noodle soup, going from $10.10 a case to over $13.50 a case. So individual items, we saw things, 30, 40. The green beans were almost 90% increase. And that, I think a rice too was about a 60% increase, just from availability from our partnerships. And we had, unfortunately, vendors that we worked with that couldn't support us during the pandemic because they had to try to restock retail and do this kind of thing. So very difficult cost time period.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we feel it at the food bank, especially when we're talking about these, millions of dollars. that it ends up making a difference in, and also feeling it at home. We've all probably noticed it when we go to the grocery store and our grocery bills are going up. We're noticing the ounces on things are actually going down, even though it may be in the same box or the same container. A question that had come in from somebody, and we do encourage questions, so please do feel free to put those in the chat. But how has, you did a good job of answering how inflation has affected the food bank. So you must have seen that question too, Rod, so thank you. Any idea or any feedback too about how that's getting down to the client and how that inflation is affecting those that we serve as well?
Sure. I mean, I think we're, as we're seeing stories in the news about 7, 9, 10% increases in just overall cost, but I'm certain from the standpoint of an individual consumer going to the grocery store. I know we go to the grocery store, we don't buy too many crazy things, getting some of the same things each week, and we're seeing that grocery bill be $20, $30, $40 more just for the same level of groceries. And so that's really, not only is it shrinking their individual buying power, so when they go to the grocery store with the same amount of funds, they're getting less food. That's impacted us for those government commodities as well, because the funding that we have for those programs, now the food that we purchase through those programs is significantly more expensive. And so things that we might have seen in the past where a truckload of canned vegetables was $15,000 or $16,000. Now that same truckload is $28,000 to $30,000. And so, and it's also affected availability of certain products in that category. So it's, I know it's affecting individuals, and probably why things like the Muni lot continue to see 2,300 families every week, and all that. So,
yeah, the fact that we're still serving 2,800 families every single week in the Muni lot is just, it's still astounding and heartbreaking, quite frankly. You mentioned truckloads, and that made me think of transportation, because I know that's been another challenge as well. Can you talk a little bit about the transportation challenges?
Absolutely. Yeah, it has been well, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of changes in the trucking industry with moving to electronic logging, that a lot of truckers were retiring. And then during the pandemic, it just really made it even worse with all of the challenges of, so much of everything is kind of built around this just-in-time model that's going to get here and right when we need it. And so lots of things are moving on trucks, and it created some real challenges. And so there's the shortage of trucking became a huge issue. I was at a meeting of the supply chain organization. We had a chance to hear a gentleman from Cisco talk about some of their challenges, and they would send a truck in to pick something up at a warehouse. After placing an order 6 weeks ahead of time, the truck gets there and they're told there's a backlog of like 200 trucks that need to be loaded because of all of the delays and all the challenges. Freight costs, talking to one of our vendors for individually portioned fruit cups. Those were imported. Bringing those over on an ocean transport was about $3,000 for a container. Just a few months ago, it was $19,000 to bring that exact same container over. So some of the vendors just are now in a position where they've almost doubled or tripled the cost of the product just to move it. So, and freight across the country for fresh produce, bringing produce here from California and Florida, like is happening this time of year. Freight costs of $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 to drive a truckload of fresh produce across the country. And that also, when we talk about the fresh produce that we're sourcing, we're doing as much as we can locally within the area of sourcing from local farms and local growers. But obviously, at this time of year, Ohio is not growing as much produce as we want to serve to the community. So we're sourcing it from other areas, and so that freight cost is really impacting us as well.
And Rod, can you share a little bit about that? We have such a great partnership with farmers and local farmers. Can you share just very quickly a little bit about that topic?
Sure. So through that state funding that I talked about, it's a program called the Agricultural Clearance Program. And what that does is it supports Ohio farmers with, they'd love to be able to donate the produce that they're growing. They grow more celery than they need to serve the grocery store chains that they support. But if there's no cost support for them, then a lot of times that was just going to get plowed under. And so this program goes back decades, I mean, really to the late 90s, even, I believe, is when a lot of this starts. So it well predates me in terms of the program, but we worked with farmers to, through that state funding, really provide cost for labor to harvest, packaging to ship, and then the trucking to get it to wherever it goes. And then in that instance, they're essentially kind of donating the produce, but we're helping them cover what are their costs. And it's been an absolutely tremendous partnership. We talk about pounds through that program. We're talking about 8.5 million pounds of fresh produce just from Ohio farmers through that program. So it's been a huge, and then they become, the farmers are really advocates for this program now. When there's a lobby day in Columbus, there are apple growers and farmers that will be a part of that lobbying effort because they know how important it is, because now they're a part of helping solve the problem.
Thanks so much, Rod. I think sometimes I always describe to folks, if you haven't had a chance to visit the food bank, I describe it as like a large Sam's Club or Costco. And if you just quickly walk through the warehouse, you just see the rows and rows and rows of shelf-stable food, like your peanut butters, your beef stews, like you said. But what's hidden back that you may not realize unless you go back there, unless there's a point to go back there, is all of the fresh produce that we get out to the community. And you already did such a nice job talking about our farmers programs that we work with. But in relation, do you know about how much fresh perishable product is going out to folks?
Yeah, I think so. 33 million pounds of our total distribution last year of the 53 or so million pounds was considered a perishable. So that's refrigerated or frozen, or an item like bread would be included in that. It's a perishable item. But so yeah, it's a huge, and from when I started in food banking, it's a complete transformation of food banking as an industry. When I started, it was a lot of just dry, shelf-stable types of products, government commodities, food drives, donations along those lines. And we really, as an industry, refocused ourselves on the fact that there's so much perishable food that's grown, that goes to stores, that goes to all these places, but then becomes unsaleable for some reason that is not necessarily related to quality. It just loses its home. And so as an industry, we refocus ourselves on sourcing that kind of product so that it, A, doesn't go to waste, and B, can get utilized by consumers. And it's an expensive item at the grocery store, so you hope that if someone gets fresh produce at a food pantry or a mobile pantry, then they have more dollars to spend on other items at the grocery store.
Very good. Thank you so much. Going back a little bit to just all the challenges that you and your team in the food bank have had to overcome in relation to the pandemic, have there been any lessons learned?
Yeah, it is. Well, I think probably one of the biggest lessons is really kind of in relationship to our kitchen. Most kitchens, like a food service operations, you're getting weekly deliveries from your vendors, and you're just ordering what you need. This week, you're ordering what you need to make all the food next week. That's really kind of our plan, and you can use your inventory space efficiently and all of those kind of things. Just in time model for that process. Well, during the pandemic, when we suddenly cannot get key meal items that we need to serve our customers, That presents a huge challenge because we've said we're going to produce these meals for these seniors, and they're not necessarily interested in hearing our stories about supply chain problems. It's today's lunch needs to be there, and it's to meet the requirements of the meal. So in the process of designing our new kitchen, we've gone through that process and looked at the size of storage that we needed. And then we talked to some experts. We're very fortunate to have a great partnership with Heinen's, who has a huge production kitchen and makes some tremendous great food. So if you shop at Heinen's and you buy your meats and some of the prepared foods, they have just an incredible facility. Well, their director of manufacturing and their director of operations are just great people. And they sat down and looked at our plan and kind of smoke tested it for us and looked for opportunities, improvement, and said, you should really make the freezer bigger. And we went from, in our original design, a freezer that would be about 15 feet tall on the inside and 2 levels of racking to one that's going to be 30 feet tall and have 4 levels of racking to enable us to go out and source more of the IQF vegetables that we want to have and other things like that, source them in larger quantities and have them available so we can mitigate some of those supply chain issues. So it's definitely, and really the flow wrapper and the conveyor was something we talked about a long time ago, but really came to the forefront of the pandemic when we now need to do the same number of meals that we needed to do for kids, but we need to keep volunteers farther apart. We need to do it with fewer volunteers. We need to do it in a shorter period of time. So that's where we look for pieces of equipment like that to really change what we're doing.
Yeah, and we briefly talked about Feeding America before, but you just talking about the kitchen and also the new kitchen that's being designed and pulling in Heinen's for their advice. And Heinen's has been involved with the food bank, since the very beginning. Just great partners of ours, a true partnership. But thinking back to the kitchen and especially to the new kitchen, as well as Feeding America, I know that, and I'll just toot our horn for very humbly for a moment, but I know that our kitchen, and you in particular, have been called on through the Feeding America Network to just present on the Cleveland Food Bank's kitchen and why that is so important and different, especially when you look at the scope of the other 200 food banks across the country. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Across the Feeding America Network, as Kristen mentioned, there's 200 and some food banks. There's probably 50 or 60 that have kitchen programs. A big portion of them are really focused on workforce development and training and teaching folks about cooking in kitchens. And then a smaller subset really do production of meals. Many of those are focused on just doing meals for kids or just doing meals for their member agencies. We're really one of the few organizations that have taken on the kind of meals that we're doing in terms of a contract basis, particularly, and then doing meals for, just do meals for just about anybody. Right now we have a program where we're doing meals for 1 to 18-month-old kids at a daycare facility, all the way through to senior home delivered meal programs. So we are doing, and the flexibility that over my shoulder back here is the design of the kitchen. You can't see it very well, but within that design, we've built the kind of flexibility to make a lot of different kinds of food, make it quickly and safely, and then package the food in a lot of different ways that will benefit the consumer and be usable at those different sites. If they need to reheat it, if they need it individually packaged, if they need it totally ready to eat, all of those things will be in place. And so they've looked at that kind of design, and we've certainly stolen good ideas from other people, but I think lots of people want to steal our good ideas about what we've done as a kitchen and what we've done as a team. And I think from a kitchen standpoint, I like to mention that we came through the pandemic with virtually zero turnover in our kitchen staff. during probably one of the most difficult periods in food production and manufacturing that has ever existed. And that's folks were either leaving the food industry or being laid off or all those different kind of things. And our staff really hung through all of that. And we've got, folks that have been here for years. We've got people like Tay, who does all the entrees for our senior program, and Ro and Joe and Jadine, who's been with the food bank 30 years, who are our prep team, and Yolanda, who does all our box lunches and things. Tasha really does the meals for she does the meals for the toddler program, kids lunches. And right before the pandemic, we were being audited by the Ohio Department of Education. They do these kind of audits every year to make sure you're following all of the rules of everything. And the auditor was here and was talking about the meals, and Tasha was there, and we were kind of talking about all that. And she said, and it was a day we'd sent out the breakfast for lunch. It was an omelet and potatoes, and I think broccoli went with it and stuff. So it's a kind of brunch for lunch type of thing. And the auditor actually said it was the first time she'd been to a kids program where she saw the kids have every single bite of the food that they'd been given. So it was really, a huge, self-esteem boost for Tasha for sure, but really, was something that we focus on, the fact that the quality is great. Folks love the food. And so I like to brag on the kitchen team as much as I possibly can.
Very well deserved. And they're a fun group to work with too. If you haven't had a chance to volunteer back in the kitchen, they're a very fun group. And some of you hit on so many of them, but could you talk maybe just very quickly about, our vegetarian days, the kosher food? You guys do such a wide range of different things back there. It's not just peanut butter and jelly. Although the kids love the peanut butter and jelly, it's not just peanut butter and jelly.
Yep. We have chicken cordon bleu on the menu. We have everything from kind of fan favorites of stuffed cabbage and stuffed peppers to vegetarian entrees like veggie lasagna and different raviolis and things along those lines. So we do try to, and then with the box lunch and cold plate program, we do try to make sure we've got options for seniors, particularly in those programs. We work with a partnership. If we have a kosher consumer that needs support, we have some partnerships that we can provide those meals through. For the child nutrition programs, we do a non-peanut menu. So there are schools that are 100% peanut free. So talking about peanut butter, we'll have one group getting a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the other group is getting a sun butter sandwich, which is kind of a sunflower butter substitute, so that it has fewer allergy issues. So we do, and some our member agencies really have kind of an a la carte choice menu that they can select from, so they get to kind of choose. And so yeah, all of that is managed by our food production manager and food quality assurance manager. And we have to label things just like we would at the grocery store. We have to have a full ingredient label on there with allergen statements and those kind of things. So we can't just throw together anything and send it out. We have to be very meticulously reading labels every single day to make sure that all of those things are in place. Because we have an inspector from the Ohio Department of Agriculture in the kitchen every single day, looking at our documentation, looking at our cleanliness, looking at labeling, all of those kind of things to make sure that we're doing the food safely. We're actually supervised under USDA, FDA, and the City of Food and Food Service Operators License. So, and then we do get quality surveys back weekly that we respond to if there's an issue. We look at those quality surveys and maybe adjust a recipe.
The fact that we're audited every single day is something that just still blows my mind. Kathy just put in the chat that she's getting hungry now. So, and there's a few questions that we're going to get to in just a minute, but if others have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. Speaking of all of the meals and making Kathy hungry, can you talk just very quickly a little bit about kind of the process of meal development, just from, taste testing to transportation to reheating to all of those things.
So we will, the food production manager, work with nutrition manager, work with vendors, look at new products, taste, try different things and come up with some interesting ideas. We've brought kids on site for meal tastings to do different menus and see how they like this taco, they like some different stir fry things along those lines. So there is a process of menu development to make sure that those meals are good. And then there's a process of quality testing those. Most of the food leaves the kitchen cold and is going to be reheated at a different site. And we're actually shipping food to around 150 different sites every day. So that's a process in and of itself. And that site may be receiving anything from 20 meals all the way up to 250 meals worth of food products. So the team will pull meals out of production in the oven, provide heating instructions for all of the food, and then we'll actually follow those heating instructions to see how things perform when they're reheated. Does the gravy still look good? The mashed potatoes still in good shape, kind of things, and they'll taste that. Typically, lunch every day is tasting samples back in the kitchen, so it's a lot of food tasting. And then just kind of monitoring that process, working with our fleet to make sure all those things are delivered on time to the member agencies as they need them each day.
And this is a good question from Ray that is related. In addition to price issues, have we been able to maintain the same level of quality as we adjust to new food sources?
It has been difficult, and it did change where we could get some food in some categories during the pandemic. For example, during normal times, pre-pandemic, and if we wanted to buy some low sodium spaghetti sauce, we could buy that from Herzl Canning in Toledo, and we would buy it from an Ohio manufacturer. Well, during difficult times, we had to go out and try to source things from a lot of different places. Some of the domestic sources for canned vegetables and things along those lines weren't available. We had to source them from as far afield as we possibly could at times to meet the needs of the disaster kits and member agencies and so forth. We have not seen, in terms of a quality response from products, a lot of negative feedback around the individual quality of products themselves. We don't source anything from a purchase standpoint that is off for a quality reason. It may be an over surplus, it may be excess inventory for a vendor or something along those lines, but it's always pretty much spec'd as regular retail quality products. For our purchasing program, there are vendors out there who sell things that are what they call plant frozen. They were going to go out of code, they put them in the freezer, and now they're going to try to move them at a discount and things along those lines. I tend to avoid that kind of product, and we tend to, with our purchase dollars, purchase what an agency could expect if they went to the grocery store and bought that same product, so that there's not any confusion between something that's donated and something that's purchased. And then also ultimately, when the consumer is going to receive that, they know they're getting something that has full shelf life, has good quality. So it challenged source, which I think is one element of it, and certainly price. But our focus was still on buying. If someone had an off-grade product, even if we needed it, I just tried to find something else instead. And so that was.
I know Carrie and I were at that kids taste testing a couple of years ago, and it was right before, it was in February of 2020. So right before the pandemic, or people were really talking about COVID. And the one story that sticks with me is what the kids taste testing looked like is we probably had about 30 or 40 or so kids, all various age groups. And we had different tables set up. And there was a volunteer at each table that had them trying, tacos or beef and cheese sticks or different types of yogurt, a wide variety of items. And it was just a taste testing. They would go around and they would try it. They would give you their feedback, and kids are not shy at giving you your feedback. I have a 3-year-old and she lets me know just what she thinks. But so they would give the feedback, and it was really good, valuable feedback. But there was one girl, and she was in middle school, and as they were passing out the samples, she would keep on giving hers to the younger kids. And someone had asked, are you not hungry? Why aren't you eating? And she had shared that she wanted to make sure that they had enough to eat first. And I think that just speaks so much of just those of who we are serving, and just the fact that she wanted to make sure that those smaller children, even in no relation to her, had received their meals first, was just very bittersweet. And once we had reassured her that we had more than enough food, we kind of looked around and she saw all the stacks that Rod, you and your team had brought up. She kind of just happily dug in. But it was just so refreshing too, to just see, again, really taking to heart what those kids had to say and adjusting the menu off of it and making sure that it is things that they want to eat and try new things. So thanks for bringing that up, Rod. It was a good memory to make me think of. So thank you. And then Rick just asked a great question. What is the best way that volunteers can help during this challenging time?
I think volunteers are always needed. And so that's definitely probably primary one, we have those shifts available each day. And typically the January, February, March timeframe is always tougher for volunteer shifts, because we know that folks that can come during the day and volunteer sometimes are retirees and different things along those lines. And if it's terrible weather, it isn't always the best scenario to have folks come out. So we're always usually running at the minimum number of volunteers we'd like to have. So having volunteers is always great. So looking at those shifts and signing up when you can is really important.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun back there. Rod had mentioned some great names: Jadine, Tay, Natasha. It is a lot of fun, especially if you haven't worked the new conveyor belts. So highly recommend getting back there. I see that we have just a couple of minutes left. Folks have had great questions. If you had any more that you're thinking of, please feel free to put them in the chat. But just to think about, Rod, we have the group of folks that we have with us. Like I had said, a good portion of them have been with us for a very long time. And we have others that have just made an absolutely incredible difference in just these past 2 years. If there was anything that you could say to them, what would it be?
Well, I know for a fact that, the things that we've been able to do in terms of innovating and in terms of responding to this has been done through the generosity of the community and the commitment of people in the greater Cleveland area to step forward and support this. As I was talking about going from 2.8 million to 4.6 million to 7.6 million. I know when I am spending that funding, I know that I'm spending dollars that people like yourselves and people across the community have been donating to the food bank, and I take that very, very seriously. I feel like people have entrusted me with those dollars to make a difference with it, and I want to make the biggest difference that I can. I want to ensure that the highest quality, the best, the most effective use of those resources is put into place to serve the community. So none of that would have been possible without your support. Things like adding conveyor belts and flow wrappers, building new facilities that we hope to someday be providing 20,000 meals a day from. All of that's the trust you're placing in us to do that work, and I humbly appreciate that, and look forward to hopefully doing that justice in the years to come.
Absolutely. And, you know, if folks have had a chance to visit the food bank, we would love to have you there again and to come visit us again, and hopefully take Rod up on his offer to come volunteer back in the kitchen. I know he would be more than delighted to stop by and say hi. But would absolutely love to have folks come visit, whether it's to volunteer, for a tour, or whatever the case may be. But we really just want to make sure that, you know, we're able to show you the incredible impact that your generosity is making, and we truly could not be more grateful. I realize we are just up on about a minute to time, and there was just one quick question that snuck in. Oh, and it just got buried. Let me find it really quickly. Real quick, Rod, what food items are now requiring more purchasing because of the decrease in donations? So if you could do that in 60 seconds or less.
Sure. I think definitely protein items are one of the most high demand, needed, and most expensive items, and people are seeing that really increase in grocery stores and being harder to source because of the manufacturing, issues. So that's something that we bought a lot more of in particularly 2020 and 2021. Frozen chicken products and beef products and things like that.
Very good. Well, Rod, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. To everybody on the line, including, an amazing team on the development team, Kate, Carrie, and Kathy, everyone, I just want to say thank you so much, because it truly takes a partnership for all of this to take place. And we are very, very grateful to be partners with all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We do have a few more of these Food for Thought Pluses scheduled for the next few months. We will be talking about our agency services and how it relates to Harvest for Hunger with Vontrice Jones next month in March. In April, we're going to be talking about with Kimmy Lavano on advocacy efforts. And there's a few others that are in the works as well. So hopefully everyone enjoyed their time today, and we all see you again soon. But in the meantime, just enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. See you later. And there's always usually a little bit of an after party afterwards of a few folks that may just still have questions or want to ask or something like that.
Sure. My dad didn't harass me, so.
No, I think we got to all of the questions, but there were just absolutely fantastic questions in here. Kate, I don't know, does it make, I see that Ann and Dorinda are still with us, and maybe they had to step away and aren't quite back yet. But maybe we could go ahead and, Kate, do you want to log us off for all of us? Okay. And then Rod, we'll send out another Zoom link and we'll jump back